A storm is brewing in Europe, as whispers of a sharp political shift echo across borders. The calm facade of solidarity is shuddering under the weight of harsh truths. Former Prime Minister of Poland, Leszek Miller, recently delivered a shocking statement that has set tongues wagging and debate ablaze. The only weapon we can give to Ukraine is young Ukrainians. In Germany, Navy Chief Mark Zeder has called for restrictions on young foreign men, hinting at a new and urgent struggle. Imagine, millions of Ukrainians who once sought refuge in Europe now face an uncomfortable reality. Huddled in Poland's bustling cities like Warsaw, Krakow, and Poznan, they are not on the battlefield, yet the call for them to return is gaining momentum. Miller's words struck a nerve, reflecting a growing weariness among European nations. Is it fair to live in comfort while others fight for their homeland? The narrative has shifted from unwavering support to a chilly pragmatism. The urgent need for manpower on the front lines is palpable, and the German perspective is rapidly evolving. Mark Zeder's bold assertions resonate deeply. No longer can European nations shoulder the burden of funding lives that should be spent defending their own countries. This potent pivot from compassion to expectation is fraught with tension. As discussions morph into demands, the questions grow increasingly uncomfortable. Why are young Ukrainian men thriving in Europe while their brothers and friends are left to shoulder the burden of war? Across taverns and public squares, such inquiries are no longer whispered, they reverberate. Igniting fierce debate. Could it be that EU leaders are beginning to view the ongoing conflict not as a humanitarian crisis but as a crisis of resource allocation? While shockwaves ripple through the media and political circles, reality is dawning. If Barker and Zed are in agreement, this could signify a game-changing trend where the status quo no longer suffices. Poland's call for youthful Ukrainians to return is not an isolated sentiment, it is becoming a rallying cry throughout Europe. Could the seeds of mobilization be taking root, calling tens of thousands back to the front lines? As the specter of a new wave of mobilization looms, unforeseen consequences threaten to upend lives yet again. The chilling reality is setting in that the ages for conscription may soon drop, as countries scramble to maintain their defenses. The specter of change hovers over the streets of Ukraine and Poland alike. In this complex tapestry of conflict, survival, and duty, will Europe stand united, or will its own citizens question their commitment to a cause that seems unending? The echoes of these questions will shape the future, as weary hearts look for answers in a continent divided, preparing for what comes next. And the only certainty is that, in this shifting landscape, every voice will matter. The situation is shifting dramatically in Europe as the discourse around Ukrainian support evolves. Poland's former Prime Minister, Leszek Miller, recently made a provocative statement that sparked intense debate. The only weapon we can provide Ukraine is young Ukrainians. His words hung heavy in the air, igniting a storm of reactions that interrogated the role of Ukrainians living in Europe, particularly those in Poland. Miller's remarks reflected a growing sentiment of fatigue among European nations. Discussions that previously centered on humanitarian aid now turned to the uncomfortable truth: many Ukrainians who could be fighting are instead enjoying life in European cities. Such a revelation raises pressing questions. Are these individuals betraying their homeland? Is there a moral obligation that transcends borders and demands their return to the battlefield? This sentiment is not isolated. Germany's Prime Minister Mark Zeder echoed similar concerns, calling for a reconsideration of how young Ukrainian men are treated within German borders. He insisted that the European Union must take a firm stance, encouraging Ukraine to reclaim its young able-bodied males from abroad, as their absence is perceived as a betrayal of their duty to defend their country. 2 years ago, Europe's rhetoric was imbued with solidarity and compassion. Now, it has transformed, leaning toward control and responsibility. Zeder's statements resonate with many Europeans who are feeling the strain of an ongoing conflict that shows no signs of resolution. The German public, once sympathetic toward Ukrainian refugees, is becoming increasingly vocal about their expectations. If able-bodied men can find refuge in Germany, why are they not at the front lines? As the situation unfolds, these conversations evolve into a societal tipping point. The shift in narrative is a response not just to the political landscape but to the exhaustion and frustration among the populace. The calls for accountability are not merely political opinions, they represent a tangible change in EU policies that could redefine the future of Ukrainian support, transitioning from unlimited aid to rigorous scrutiny. the implications are profound. What happens next could reshape the countries involved and alter the dynamics of the ongoing conflict. As we delve deeper, we must ask, will Europe continue to support Ukraine with open arms, or will the tide turn toward more stringent measures? The answers remain to be seen, but with escalating pressures from within, a monumental shift may be on the horizon. As Europe stands on a precipice, the winds of change are rustling the leaves of solidarity. Once synonymous with compassion, the European stance toward Ukrainian refugees is shifting dramatically. No longer is it merely about open arms. Now, uncomfortable questions linger in the air. Why are young Ukrainians, able to fight, choosing the comforts of European cities over the battlefields of their homeland? Germany has begun grappling with these concerns. The Bavarian Prime Minister has called for a re-evaluation of how Ukraine's young men are treated within the continent. In the past, they were welcomed with open doors, but as debates heat up, there's a troubling undercurrent suggesting a need for restrictions. Questions arise: how can young men find jobs in Berlin while their compatriots shoulder the burden of defending their country? As numbers of refugees swell into the thousands each week, whispers of changing policies fill the air. The citizens of Germany are increasingly aware, engaged, and concerned. They demand accountability. They challenge the notion that the war is someone else's burden to bear. While once they offered financial aid, resources, and humanitarian support with a sense of unyielding solidarity, the changing narrative now reflects anxiety and pragmatism. No longer are the words support and solidarity at the forefront. Instead, Germany's leaders are exploring control and restriction. The message is clear: there comes a time when compassion must give way to practicality. And as the clock ticks closer to elections, the specter of military obligations looms large over the decision-making process. Legislation teeters on the edge, suggesting that young men must prove their exemption from service, or face the dire consequences of illegal status. The rhetoric is transforming, and trust in leadership falters. But what does this mean for the future? Are these fresh waves of policy indicative of a hardened European sentiment, or a necessary recalibration of priorities? As the tide turns, the questions multiply. Can a country demand loyalty from those who seek refuge? Are young men fated to choose between comfort and duty? In this moment of uncertainty, every heartbeat echoes a fight for survival, as societies grapple with the clash between compassion and pragmatism, and the realization that the limits of support may soon be reached. And then there's the announcement that will shake foundations, a new wave of mobilization sweeping across Ukraine. How will Europe respond as the call for duty intensifies? The air crackles with tension as the clock counts down to an unsettling climax. Can they confront the reality of conflict without losing their humanity? A shift is occurring in Europe, shaking the foundations of support for Ukraine. As the urgency grows, citizens are now questioning the status quo. The previous rallying cry of solidarity has morphed into discussions of control and limitations. Why are young Ukrainians residing in Europe, holding jobs while their compatriots fight on the front lines? As these uncomfortable questions arise, political debates intensify, ringing out in public discourse. In Germany and Poland, frustrations are mounting. Voters are weary of financial burdens, weary of migrants, and weary of a war that seems never ending. Urgent voices demand action, cutting through the air like a knife. Politicians recognize this weariness and react. New policies are forming, not to oppose Ukrainians, but to protect national interests against their own citizens' concerns. In Germany, officials now demand proof of exemption from military service. No such documentation? Then forget about obtaining legal status. In Poland, the same sentiment brews beneath the surface. People feel drained. They see the clock ticking down for action. A wave of returns is near as discussions of re-establishing mobilization in Ukraine gain traction. How young does a recruit have to be? Authorities propose lowering the age of service from 25 to 23, a drastic measure born from a dire shortage of infantry. Commanders voice their concerns as frontline positions become harder to maintain. What sounds like a mere bureaucratic adjustment is, in reality, a desperate last attempt to bolster troop numbers. Along the grim streets under the shadow of an impending mobilization, citizens wonder where the line is drawn between defense and obligation. Alarm bells ring out in Trvoga. Will those not yet considered of military age face the consequences? The landscape in Europe is shifting, transitioning from a stance of endless promises to a pragmatic demand for sacrifices. The pressure mounts, and time is running out. As mobilization tensions mount in Ukraine, experts warn that swift legal shifts could drag even recent grads into the fray. Meanwhile, on the anxious streets of the capital, wary whispers echo, where does true defense end and relentless pursuit begin? Society braces for upheaval, growing fiercer by the day. Imagine the acrid smell of stale smoke clinging to crowded cafes in Kiev, where young voices once buzzed with dreams of university days. Now, flashbacks haunt, the soft rustle of textbooks flipping under dim lamps, the sharp bite of cold winter air on cheeks during late-night study breaks, memories shattered by this relentless drumbeat of duty. What if avoiding the call means facing a country's wrath? Dare to ignore the summons, and you'll feel the iron grip tighten around your life. Those dodging summons now face relentless scrutiny, with summons targeting men from 17 to 25 years old. Fines escalate like a storm, starting at a mere warning on the bureaucracy's doorstep. Miss it for just 2 weeks. The hammer falls, up to 51,000 hryvnia in penalties, siphoning from your accounts. No mercy follows. Then, the onslaught ramps up, blockades on finances, intrusive visits from officials, and court summons casting long shadows. Laws clamp down with total force, erasing the line between oversight and siege. Where citizens once murmured dissent, now a chilling mantra reigns, no escape remains. Ukraine unleashes a brutal mobilization wave, forcing every eligible soul into stark choices. Form up for battle immediately, or risk becoming an outlaw hunted by the system itself. No shades of gray, it's comply or collide with punitive might. On the cobbled streets of Ternopil, armed patrols now prowl under the fading autumn light, boots crunching gravel as they scan faces with predatory eyes. What was once a rare tactic, military details assisting territorial centers, now spirals into chaos. Fighters from elite units, clad in weathered fatigue smelling of gun oil and sweat, join the fray. Papers demanded abruptly, interrogations barked in the open market's cacophony. In a recent scandal that spread like wildfire across the nation, uniformed men approached guys off guard, barking orders amid the bustle of shoppers. Revealed later, they weren't rogue actors but reinforcements from actual combat brigades, sent to bolster the hunt. Confirmations trickle in, such raids aren't anomalies but emerging norms, militia aid amplifying the dragnet. Power structures, once confined to desks, now swarm everywhere. Experts speak of an unprecedented escalation. In this new regime, every arm of the state converges on one grim purpose, filling the meat grinder. Tactical combat forces collide with reserves in a desperate scrum. Sensory overkill hits, the metallic tang of fear in the air, hands clammy as sirens wail nearby. Rhetorical echoes rise, how long until every corner harbors latent peril? Is this defense, or a descent into darkness? With youth fleeing or fighting shadows, what fractures next in this crumbling facade? Will the state's iron resolve shatter families or forge unbreakable martyrs? Amid the upheaval, a sinister twist looms. Can anyone truly evade the net? Or does bravery now demand surrender to the unknown? In a world where uncertainty lurks around every corner, the streets have become a battlefield of a different kind. Men wander through the city, their faces a mix of confusion and fear, as they are confronted by masked figures who demand their identification. It's a chilling scene, reminiscent of a tense thriller. But as the dust settles, it turns out these figures are soldiers, dispatched to assist territorial defense units. However, this isn't an ordinary mobilization, it's a desperate maneuver born from chaos and panic. These military divisions are more than just a show of force, they emerge as protectors of civilians, yet the anxiety thickens the air. With every footstep echoing on the cracked pavement, there's an unspoken fear that engulfs the populace. Why are citizens apprehensive about stepping outside? Videos flood social media, showcasing men nervously shuffling along sidewalks, their hearts heavy with an unsettling reality. Even the ones willing to serve express disillusionment. They claim the system has degraded into disorder, a far cry from the idea of a disciplined army. As this trend unfolds, the notion of national security hangs dangerously in the balance. Instead of a cohesive mobilization strategy, panic reigns supreme. Who can you trust when the very fabric of order unravels? The feelings of dread deepen as individuals witness the military instructors, once a symbol of hope, now roaming the streets with a sense of urgency. Families are torn apart, and the question looms large: what happens when the call for arms turns into a chaotic scramble for survival? In Ukraine. This is the ugly truth beneath the surface. Soldiers are disillusioned, left without clear paths or directives. The chaos isn't a reform, it's a disintegration of trust. The anxiety palpable, the next phase of mobilization draws near, characterized by uncertainty and fear. Men, once proud, now wander without purpose, carrying the weight of their desires, knowing the country may demand more of them than they can deliver. The reality paints a grim picture. Inside the national park, soldiers who once were instructors now facilitate a different kind of assembly, devoid of structure. With no documents or tangible support, men await orders under pressure and despair. A transformation once seen as hopeful now paints a bleak future instead. Can a nation survive when its own guardians are consumed by instability? The military officials express a stark reality: the current mobilization is failing to reach the front lines. Young soldiers hesitate to fight, fearing both the battle and the trustworthiness of their leaders. This situation signals a deeper issue: internal support is dwindling. With every unanswered question, the specter of moral defeat looms larger. The state seems to be at a crossroads, resorting to the youth as mere statistics in a grim calculation of survival. As the war stretches on, hope wanes. Europe, weary of its implications, finds itself caught in a cycle of demands for contributions to the effort while the youth languish unarmed. But what will transpire beyond mobilization? When the dust settles, and soldiers return home, who will rebuild? The identities forged in conflict, national flags, ideologies, will lie in ruins unless nurtured by those who once held promise. The human cost of war is staggering, and in its wake, what future remains for a nation? Orders and laws mean little without the steadfast choices of its people. As the shadows of despair threaten to choke the will to believe, remember, the power to shape destiny lies within. Fear and false narratives can no longer dictate the path forward. Take care of yourself, foster the bonds with loved ones, and cherish the flickers of hope. As long as life persists, the possibility for a brighter future remains intact. In the harsh reality of today's military landscape, a growing tension ripples through the hearts of those affected. Soldiers stand hesitant, uncertain of where their path leads them. In a fractured system, trust is elusive, and fear runs rampant. With disillusionment igniting in the ranks, the once grand war for ideals morphs into a dire struggle for survival. How long can this clash of wills persist before the very essence of humanity is lost? As the consciousness of the populace evolves, the moral fabric frays. Scattered throughout Europe, the youth ponder their place: fight on the front lines or seek refuge in safety. The escalating calls for accountability cannot be ignored, yet no clear answer emerges. When will this conflict claim an end? It's a haunting question, one that could define generations. Without youth to helm the future, what will become of nations? Whose hand will clean the slate, restore hope, and breathe life into new dreams? There's a bitter truth to confront: fear can paralyze, but it's resilience that can revive. When the air is thick with doubt, it's imperative to remember, every choice carries weight. You are not merely a pawn in a greater game. Protect what's dear and strive for a world reborn from the ashes of despair. Remember, as long as we live and breathe, there's a chance to rebuild what's been lost. What if the real battle is yet to come? As Europe sways on the precipice of moral integrity, the challenges that arise could reshape everything we hold dear. The real victory isn't just in survival but in the choices made in the dark moments. Hang on to that glimmer of hope and rise, because tomorrow can be built anew. In a world on the brink of chaos, the military raises a troubling alarm. Mobilization efforts falter, with soldiers fearful and untrusting. They hesitate to arm themselves, lost in a landscape of uncertainty. These are not just numbers, they are lives weighed down by doubt. Europe, too, feels the weight of weariness, as the brutal reality twists the ideals once fiercely upheld. But as the clock ticks, a shocking truth surfaces: what happens when the dust settles? What future awaits when the war cries fade and the horizons clear? Who will step up to rebuild the shattered nation? The burden of the past continues to haunt the present. Imagine a young soldier, hesitant and confused, clutching his weapon, but questioning the very purpose of his fight. His friends have scattered, many sheltered in foreign lands, while he grapples with feelings of betrayal. Is the fight truly for freedom or merely a struggle for survival? Moral boundaries blur, as the voices of the weary drown out the dreams of young Ukrainians. Can a country thrive when its heartbeat lies dormant among those who should be its future? The world around them is changing. Once conjoined by hope, it now divides itself with skepticism and despair. Yet, the call to arms remains a deafening echo. Governments demand sacrifice and loyalty, pushing where compassion once prevailed. The questions loom larger: who will emerge to lead the survivors back home? What reconciliation awaits them after the mobilization ends, and realities collide? The societal fabric begins to fray as people grow increasingly disillusioned. They seek accountability and clarity in a time when support shifts sharply from ideals to harsh realities. A changing Europe wonders, why are young men comfortable in safety, while their compatriots face the front lines? The air buzzes with tension, suffused with the smell of uncertainty and the weight of hushed conversations. In this critical moment, a chilling possibility emerges. The rise of new mobilization methods might tighten control over the populace, forcing many into a deciding battle. But are governments prepared for the human cost of such actions, or will desperation propel them to unimaginable lengths? As the streets fill with soldiers, ordinary lives intertwine with the machinery of war. It's a harsh reality when mobilization becomes not just a state decision but a collective experience. As whispers of chaos take form, the escalating urgency hints at a moment of reckoning. Yet with every twist and turn, resilience flickers to life. No matter how dark the path becomes, each individual holds a power untapped by the shadows looming on the horizon. The weight of choices looms larger than ever, to act or remain stagnant in the face of overwhelming fear. The next chapter unfolds, revealing the choices made today will alter the course of tomorrow. Empathy and connection fuel the spirit of a nation at war. The call to unity emerges. Despite the sacrifices and chaos, hope holds its ground. In a shocking twist, as the canvas of war threatens to consume them, an unexpected ally arises from the shadows. What if unity and strength can forge a new path, transforming despair into resilience? As they stand at the crossroads, each individual must consider, will they embrace the flame of hope or let the embers of conflict extinguish their future? The game is not one of survival, it's a battle for the soul of their collective humanity,